So there are two things that men always lie on. The first thing is their height, and the second thing is their ROAS. From a high level, the number one thing you need to remember when you're creating an ad is that you need to create a very high level of clarity and understanding from the person that's reading or watching the ad. And where people get stuck, this is, I think, the most important part of it. People think, man, how the heck am I gonna sit here and write 10 angles of ads a week? Like, there are very few people that are that creative. You've got copywriting, you've got media buying, then you've got like overall marketing strategy. And again, those are hard to find, right? So tactically, what I would do if I were you, if you're looking for these people is...
All right, what's going on, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls? Welcome back to another episode of the Scaling Less Stupid podcast. And we're doing something a little bit different here. So if you've listened to any of the other episodes, you've noticed that we've done interviews with clients, talked about their successes, what they did to get to where they are and things like that. But I wanted to do something a little bit different. And what we'll do moving forward is, let's say every 5 to 10 episodes or so, we'll bring someone from our team, right, from Closers.io, bring them onto the podcast and really just dive into their zone of genius and ask questions about like how they got to where they are and also what they do within the company to ultimately help the company grow. So today we have our CMO, a guy that's running, I mean, at this point, tens of thousands of dollars a day on advertising, pretty much runs our entire team from a creative perspective, from a marketing perspective. So Spencer, welcome to the podcast. How's it going, man?
It's great to be here, man. I appreciate the warm welcome and great intro.
Let's get it, man. So before we jump into the nitty gritty of marketing, because obviously we can sit here for hours and talk about the specifics and each little piece of marketing, but I do want to rewind the clocks a little bit and kind of get your come up story, if we will. I mean, you also were a client in STA, so I guess there's kind of like a 2-for-1, I guess you can say. So just bring us back. Maybe what was like maybe one of your first businesses that you started? How did you kind of get into the online space?
Yeah, so started a tremendous amount of businesses, and all of which failed miserably. And after failing over and over again with everything from a car detail shop to a website building business to, I mean, I even had a company called Social Seniors where I tried to teach elderly people how to use Facebook, not Facebook ads, just Facebook. Okay, so went through the ringer. This is right out of high school. And I actually had a mentor of mine sit down with me, and he gave me one of the best lessons I've ever had. He said, Spencer, if you had a 300-page book in front of you and there was a check inside, and it's $1 million check, and you don't know which page it's between, right? And you can't see it from the outside. How would you go and you would search, how would you search through the book to find the check? And I'd say, well, I'd go to page 1. If I didn't see it, I'd go to page 2. If I didn't see it, I'd go to page 3. He said, exactly. He said, but what you're doing in business right now, you're shiny object syndrome. You're jumping from page 247, then back to page 12, then page 315, then page 212, and you're never going to find it because you're going to forget which pages you've already checked. And that was kind of the wake up moment for me to say, I got to really focus on one thing. And at the time, I happened to be working on what became my first very successful business. It's called surplusfund.com. It was an info business selling courses, coaching, a BizOps style offer. And at that time, this is 2017, we were using live webinars at that time to sell a 997 product. And we had our first live webinar that we somehow got like 100 people to register for. I don't even know exactly how we did that. I think we like rented an email list or something. And I just remember the night before being so hyped about like, man, we're gonna, Russell Brunson says I'm gonna close 30% of the room. 100 people registered, 30 of them are gonna close. I'm gonna make $30,000 tomorrow. And you got to keep in mind here, I'm like 18, 19. I don't have a ton of money, right?
Yeah. So
of course, 100 people don't show up, right? Like 50 show up, and then of the 50, we close 0 people, and it was like a huge embarrassment. I was like, this is
great close rate.
Great close rate, crushed it, A+. So after that, I was like, let me practice this some more. It was kind of November 2017, right? It's like, let me practice starting the first week of January 2018. We're gonna go back in. We're gonna do a webinar a week. That was what Russell Brunson was, preaching at this time. Yeah. Webinar a week until you make $1 million. So that's what I'm gonna do. And we came back, spent like 6 weeks dialing this thing in. First week of January 2018, I'm like, man, we're gonna crush this thing. Rented their email list. We got like 120 registrants. It was more than the first time. I'm like, dude, I'm about to make like $5 million this year. Like, this is going to be the best year of my life. And we get on the webinar, 60, 70 people show up, 0 close. Okay. And so we did this over and over again. I did 17 live webinars in a row without getting a sale. And finally, on the last webinar, we had canceled it because I got sick, but we had some people that had registered before we canceled it. 3 people showed up, and I closed 2 of them. And I thought I was Jeff Bezos. I was like, this is the greatest day of my life.
What was the price point?
It was 997.
What was the 997?
Made
Okay.
$2,000. You know, I was like, I am the richest person.
$2,000 for 17 weeks of work.
$2,000 for 17 weeks. But that's the thing about entrepreneurs. Like, we're the only people that would think that that's a win, you know? Yeah. But it is, right? And so long story short, I took that live webinar, got that to like 10, 20 grand a month, pivoted to, you know, what back then was called a sideways webinar. If you're familiar, it's kind of like a product launch funnel, or like kind of like a challenge. Like it's this weird thing. No one really does it anymore. That got me like 30, 40 grand a month. And then, you know, in less than a year from the first sale, we were doing 100, 120, 130 grand a month with an automated webinar. So we pivoted a few times, but it was the same product, same offer, all that. And we ended up scaling that all the way to 300, 400 grand a month, 500 grand a month was like our peak. Eventually, I created kind of a little mastermind group called the Webinar Mafia, and started hanging out with some really, really cool people. And one day this guy and it was invite only. You had to like be invited. It was free for the most part. We started charging then, but you know, it was just a private Slack group, really, really, really high level guys. And at the, towards the very end of that group, someone gets invited into the group. I'd never seen this guy before. And he comes in, his name's Cole Gordon. And Cole I think he closed everyone in the group. like literally just closed everyone in the group. And like within like a month, you know, and he was, you know, talking about this high ticket thing. I never even heard of high ticket before. I'm already doing 400 grand a month. I mean, you know, I wasn't doing nothing, right? This is a couple years after obviously we started, but that's how I got into high ticket, launched a call funnel, scaled that pretty aggressively at 800, 900 grand a month was our peak with that. And the rest is history. So that's my come up story.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I want to kind of focus in on there, because you know, as we're going through, my original intention was, hey, let's like talk about marketing, but I think you starting Surplus Funds and going through that whole thing is like, you're also, I mean, you were a client, right? So like, what were the things that you like that kind of got you through doing those 17 webinars? Like, what was in your head where you're like, I just need to do another one? Because you know, we see a lot now, even with clients, is like they'll do one, you know, they'll post one time on Instagram, or they'll shoot 2 ads, or they'll do one you know, launch, and they're like, oh, this doesn't work, I need to go to the next thing. What kept you on that path of like, I'm just going to keep doing this until it works?
Yeah, I think I learned in high school. So to give a little context, high school, I was an athlete, played basketball, and I was never like, you know, I'm a taller guy, I'm pretty athletic, but I was never like, you know, just raw talent wise with basketball. Like I had to develop everything. Like there was no like raw advantage I had. And so I went through without going into the super long story, I went through a really hard time in high school where most people would have quit. But I just loved basketball so much. And I was like, man, I'm just going to keep going. And then I went from basically being the guy that was like going to get cut on the team after having this like really, really drastic injury, and literally at one point being like bullied by the kids on my team because they're like, oh, you abandoned us. I'm like, dude, my ankle bone is sticking out of my leg. I don't know what you want me to do, dude. You know, but I went from that to within a year of that being the team captain of the entire program. Right. And that was all, again, none of it was raw talent. That was all from just like pushing massive amounts of persistence. And that was kind of the first time I remember having an epiphany, like, oh, like I can just outlast people. Like that is a strategy. Like it's a very painful, grindy strategy, but that is a strategy. And so I kind of had forgotten that lesson when I went through the shiny object syndrome. And then, you know, fast forward to that mentor giving that lesson. And I'm just like, dude, I know there's $1 million check in this webinar book. I'm just going to keep doing it until I find this check. And it, you know, there were times I wanted to quit for sure, but you know, aside from just the learned skill of persistence, I think the other part of it was, you know, I think when you're starting out, it's actually easier to be persistent than when you're already successful, because, you know, I was in a situation like I was living at home. I didn't really have any money. You know, I was like, I hated going to college. So I was like trying to get out of college. So there was nothing I was like, oh, I could be doing something better. It's like, no, this is the only thing I could be doing. That's good. You know?
Yeah.
So I think between those two things, and that's been one of the tricks, maybe we talk about this later, but I've had now where because once you're successful, you've got money, like your life is pretty good. How do you keep that same level of persistence and pushing through pain when you could just be like, oh, I'll just hang out, you know?
Mhm.
It's challenging.
Yeah. So remind me, so with the company you had before, what did you scale up to?
Our peak was like I think it was like 850.
Okay, nice. So in that area, can you maybe speak to some of like the, when we look at businesses, a lot of times it's not like a linear, just like straight up. It's like you go up a little bit and then you kind of plateau and you go up because there's like different bottlenecks that you're trying to solve. So
Mhm.
what could you speak to other people that might be in that, maybe they're just getting started or maybe like they have 10, 20 grand a month, like some of the things that they can expect when they're getting to 100 or whatever those plateaus you think would be.
Yeah, so the main plateaus we hit were, first of all, getting our first sale, but assuming the path to that is just persistence, right? Then you get
Mhm.
your first sale. The next one we hit was at 10K a month, or between 10 and 20K a month. And basically what happened there was I didn't collect enough cash up front. So my price point at that time was 997 upfront or 3 payments of 397. And my
Mhm.
take rate for the 397 was like 80%. And then we had no collections process at all.
Mhm.
And so what ended up happening, and then I wasn't tracking any numbers. Like I hadn't even learned that you need to like track this stuff, right? So I was just like, we're doing 20 grand a month. And then like the bank account is just like getting smaller.
Yeah.
Like, but we're doing 20 grand a month.
Yeah.
And I remember it just got worse and worse, especially as like the end of that year kind of came, because B2C Q4 is usually a little bit tougher for info businesses. And we're getting less sales, and then more of them are taking the 397 thing. And like our CPA was like, it went from like $200 where we were making money to like $500. Now we're losing money on like the first sale. But again, but I'm looking at like, oh, we're making 30 grand a month, making like whatever it is. And so
Yeah.
finally, I literally would never get this day. I remember I was like, I need to go back, and I got like a master tracking sheet, like very basic spreadsheet.
Mhm.
I was like, I'm just going to manually input every single day's worth of data since I launched this funnel. And I sat
Mhm.
there for 8 hours and plugged in. And then like, it was like a scene from Limitless. I like knew exactly what the problem was. I was like, oh, I was like,
Mhm.
that's the problem. And so plateau number one, especially if you're starting with paid ads, I've seen this over and over again. It might be higher than 10K. For me, it was a little bit lower because of the price points back then. But regardless, it's dialing in your tracking, because I've seen this over and over. People will get to 50, 100K a month, and they're like, I don't know how to scale. And I'm like, well, like, how do you drive traffic? They're like, oh, I do organic and paid. I'm like, cool. Well, how many sales did you get from paid? They're like, I don't know. How
Mhm.
much is your cost to book a call? Well, if you include the organic calls, it's like $12. I'm like, okay, well, that's probably not what it actually is. And if you're scaling on paid ads, right? Because when you're small, if you're booking 100 calls a month and you have a decent organic presence, it's probably like 60-40. It's probably like 60% organic, 40% paid.
Mhm.
But if your plan is to rapidly scale your paid traffic, and you're going to go from spending like 5,000 a month to like 3,000 a day, then like it's going to go from 60-40 organic paid to like 1% or 5% organic, 95% paid. And if you don't even know your paid metrics, how do you know if you can even scale? Right.
Mhm.
So that was the first major plateau. And then the second big plateau I hit was with the webinar around a few hundred grand a month. This is classic case of no back end offer. And is very, very straightforward. Like, we continue to scale. We had 2 to 3x cash ROAS on the front end with the webinar for a long time. And it's funny. I remember talking to a few people I really respected at that time, that I was in their masterminds and stuff. And I was like, oh, like, should I build a back end? And all of them said no. They were like, no, just keep scaling the webinar, which, shout out to all of them. They gave me tremendous advice. That piece of advice really was not good. I should have had a back end. And so, it seems so obvious in hindsight, obviously, but at that time, you're figuring things out. I didn't even have a tracking sheet a year before. So, do I need a
Mhm.
backend? Do I not? That was the next big one. But knowing what I know now, I mean, dude, I could have ran that webinar with a back end offer. We could have been doing $1 million a month, $1.5 million a month in like 2019,
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like hindsight's always 2020. It's like you look back, you're like, I could have like scaled it, to $1 million a month in, 6 months versus the couple years that it took. So,
Right.
speaking on some of those things in there, I think a big question that I see from current clients and not even current clients, just people trying to figure out, okay, what's like the path that I should take from a marketing perspective. And then of course, like everyone's a marketer. So it's like, you have one person that's like, don't do a VSL, do this. And it's like, don't start a school group, start a webinar, and don't do a webinar, do a group funnel. So what would you say to someone if they're like, if you can put maybe a marketing campaign or a marketing funnel to like a level of revenue, and we can talk like call funnel, webinar, group funnel, like what should someone jump into, like just getting started, and then something a little bit more advanced?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't even like to reframe that, because I think the best way to look at what funnel you should use is not about like how much revenue you're doing. It's more around like what your skill set is. So there's kind of like 3 different archetypes that you could be. And obviously this is not black and white. There's a scale for all this. But the first one is the most obvious one, which is like, I'm a complete beginner. I have never done any of this before, right? If that's the case, then by far the easiest is just like classic short form funnel. You know, it is the simplest, the least tech you're going to have to learn, the least sales manager you're going to have to learn to start making money. Like it is the least amount of money you're going to have to spend just in general, like with ads and all that. It's, you know, that is for complete beginner. That is the best place to start for sure. There's basically no debate. Then you have the other 2 archetypes. And so the way I want you to think about this is all funnels live on a scale between being marketing centric and sales centric. Okay. And essentially, the further, you know, some funnels live further on one side, some funnels live further on the other side. But whatever your natural proclivity or skill set is, and I say natural as if it's, again, it's like raw talent, you know, whatever you've developed, doesn't have to be raw talent, whatever you've developed, if you're more marketing heavy, then you might want to rely on more marketing heavy based funnels. If you're more sales heavy, you might want to rely on more sales based funnels, right? And so what I mean by that is sales. When I say, you know, all funnels have sales, but what I mean by that is phone sales, right? Zoom sales. There's a natural a scale that all these funnels live on. And before I even give this advice, I want to say most people are not as good at marketing as they think they are. Okay, let's just start with that. So if you're like, oh, I'm a great marketer, it's like, okay, but are you really? Like, because I see a lot of people, they're like, oh, I've run a direct VSL at, you know, 50 grand a month. You know, I'm a great marketer. It's like, no, you're not. Like if you tried to run a cold automated webinar, you would get destroyed. Like you would get annihilated, right? And that's okay. Like, you know, yeah, that's okay. You know, let's just be honest about it so you can make a good decision. But with all that being said, if you're more marketing centric, if that's truly your skill set, and or you're like, man, I'm just going to go hard and figuring this out like I did with the webinar, which, you know, may or may not be the best thing. It took me a long time to make any real money. Then you want to go more marketing centric funnels, which is typically like a webinar funnel. It's funnels that they do a lot more of the heavy lifting, so that even if you do have sales calls, by the time they get to the sales call, they're much more bought in and they're more like that, right? Now, again, this all sounds great because the people that run VSL or call funnels or sales-based funnels right now are like, oh, that sounds amazing. But what they don't realize is if you do the webinar poorly or you do the challenge poorly, whatever it is, you don't get that result. Like, it's not like just by having a webinar, you get people that are more bought in. It has to be a good webinar, right? And then on the other side, if you're more a sales centric, maybe your background's in sales, you know, you've just run call funnels before, you know, the classic rule of the more expensive your product is upfront, the easier it's going to be to get a return on ad spend upfront, right? And that is always the case. And so by and large, for most people, like 95% of people, the best funnels to start with are sales centric funnels, which would be, you know, again, the short form funnel, the group funnel, or the call funnel, meaning like application or VSL. If you do have some experience with copywriting, you can jump right to the VSL, but just know it's going to be tough in terms of ad spend to get it validated. For most people, again, if you're starting out, short form funnel is probably your best answer. If not, maybe a group funnel, but you know, the problem there is then you got to have now you're managing this group. It's kind of a pain in the ass.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times it's like you said, it's going to be very dependent on their archetype, and then also maybe even the team that they have behind them. Because like with a group, you're going to have like an admin and a setter and all these people versus like a call funnel. You can kind of just like, you know, I'm oversimplifying and saying like get an ad up and throw it to an application and to book a call, but it's a lot less friction to get started from like a team perspective. So now we've covered the funnel thing. Taking one step back, you know, what we obviously have to have some sort of like ad or call to action and get them into that funnel. So what would you give to people as like maybe I don't know, again, it's not easy to just put in a 3-minute answer, but just like a good ad framework that someone can follow. They can listen to this episode and be like, okay, here's step 1, step 2, step 3. I can go rip an ad right now.
Yes. Okay. So before I give you exact steps, which I will give, from a high level, the number one thing you need to remember when you're creating an ad is that you need to create a very high level of clarity and understanding from the person that's, reading or watching the ad, right? Like if the person reading the ad does not understand what you're saying, no matter how good the copy is, they're not going to click and they're not going to buy. A confused mind buys nothing, right? That is the classic direct response thing. Okay. So anything, the steps you need to think through, how can I make this good while also making it simple? And a lot of times making it simple and concise is what makes it good, right? But in terms of steps, the most important part of an ad is the hook, is the beginning of the ad. Just for context, internally at Closers, all of the ads that we write will spend probably between 50 and 60% of our energy just getting the first 5 seconds, 10 seconds, few lines of the copy, getting that first initial part as good as we possibly can get. Because basically, if that's bad, no one's going to care about the rest of it. Okay. So what makes a good hook? Well, there's basically two types of hooks. And again, this is not a binary, this is a scale. There's direct-based hooks, which is like, hey, here's my offer. And an offer is like, here's the thing I'm going to provide you, and here's a risk reversal. So, hey, I'll give you a setter and closure, and if it doesn't work, you don't pay, right? Risk reversal is that you don't pay. What I'm going to give to you is the setter or closure, right? If you have a really, really good offer, that's the easiest ad in the world to write. If you don't have a really good offer, unbeknownst to Alex Ramosi, you can still run ads very profitably. I did it for a long time. And all you do is you just make them indirect. So instead of a direct hook, you make it indirect. And so you say, a great book for this, by the way, is Great Leads. It talks about a handful of different types of hooks that you can write. But for example, one of them might be a secret lead. So it might be like, hey, the government is sitting on billions of dollars owed to American citizens right now, right? So people like that, that's like very, like, what is that? I don't even know what that is. That's like very curiosity driven. And so either way, whether you do a direct or indirect hook, you want your target market to think, like, what is this? I don't know about this. This seems interesting. That's what you want them to think, is this seems interesting and I'm curious. You want them to be in a frame of curiosity, okay? So after you do the initial hook, what I think works really, really well next is some sort of a proof element. So hook and then proof. And so proof, it might be, a very direct form of proof where it's like a testimonial. Hey, here's this person, they made money. Here's this sales team that we placed a closer setter with. They crushed it. Whatever it is. Or it may be indirect proof. So again, if you're more B2C, biz op, maybe you're not, after you say the government's sitting on the secret billions of dollars, maybe you don't just be like, and this person made money, because that doesn't really make sense together. But maybe you just you say like, and knowing that is exactly how I've cut out a great career in life for myself. And then it pans to you in like a mansion, or you in a Lamborghini, because that's indirect subconscious proof, right? So you got hook, you have proof, then you have a bit of an explanation. Now, this is where people really go wrong, because they think explanation means like you give away the sauce, right? And sometimes that's the case. So for direct ads, you do want to explain in a simple manner of like, hey, here's how we get you this result. The first thing we do is this. Second thing we do is this. Third thing we do is this. And you want it to make sense in the person's head. But what you don't want to do, especially with indirect, is you don't want to say exactly what it is, break all the curiosity, and remove any of that, like, what is this? You don't want to do that. So it's a very fine line, and it takes some practice. And after you've done, again, to walk through a hook, proof, and then a slight explanation, then you'll go into your first call to action. Again, all of that should take, we've seen anywhere between 30 seconds works well. People always ask, how long should my ad be? 30 seconds all the way to 3 minutes. I mean, we've tested everything, and they all can work. It's not about how long it is, it's about how good it is, right? But I've traditionally seen that the first call to action somewhere in the 45-second to minute 15-second is usually a good kind of first place for that. Once you do the first call to action, then you'll want to go back, give some more proof, drive some more curiosity, and drop another call to action. So, we usually aim for 2 to 3 in all of our ads.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to emphasize a piece that you said in there in terms of like the length, because I think a lot of people, they will they want like a link so they can like fit the script into it. But like you said, it's like we've seen some ads. I mean, let's say there were just like a story ad, for example, right? It's like 10 seconds, 11-second ad that, that performed really well for a long time, that ran for, 6 to 8 months. And then, we've also had more like, the B2C side is, those are, 2 to 3 minutes long to really build a curiosity and, get them to move them over. So would you say that there's like different structures, just so people have the context too? Do you think there's different structures for like, let's say like a different type of funnel? So, well, I mean, other than like the obvious part of like, if they're going to book a call, the CTA is to book a call versus like a training. Do you think there's like any other fundamental changes within the ad?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely are, right? But I do think people overstate them. So there's, to your point, like going from booking a call to registering for a webinar, right? Okay, yeah, the call to action is going to be different, but a lot of the ads are the same. I think the biggest difference in the actual ads are going to be whether it's a direct based ad or an indirect based ad. So if you're talking about the offer in the ad, then your call to action, yes, it's going to be, watch the video and book a call, but you're almost like pre-selling them already on what you do, right? Whereas indirect, where a lot of people go wrong, is they take that same mindset. And that's not what you want to do. All you're doing in an indirect ad, in a lot of ways are actually easier, is you're just building a tremendous amount of curiosity and getting them excited for something. They don't even know what it is. They're like, this sounds really cool. I want to register and learn more, But a lot of people, they'll take that direct-based methodology of like, hey, here's our offer, and here's why you should buy it, and book a call and learn more, da da da. And then they'll apply that to the indirect. So they have this curiosity at the beginning, and then they like basically cut it in half, and they say like, hey, I know you don't even know what this thing is, but we're going to help you learn this method that you just, and it's like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't even know what this is, right? So that's the biggest difference. And then aside from that, the other big differences that we've seen is like, if you're going from very, very high ticket, or like a call funnel, something like that, and then you launch like a low ticket funnel, like a book funnel or something like that, those ads are different, right? Because you're selling a physical product. The ad is centered around the physical product. Now, a lot of the copy is similar because you're still selling them on the same pain points, the same benefits, all of that. It's just now it's in this physical medium, right, of this book, right? And so the ad is centered around that. And a lot of people make the mistake of they try to run like a webinar ad or like a VSL call funnel ad to like a book. And then people are like, what is going on, right?
Yeah. It's just incongruent, and they're like, wait, what the heck? This doesn't make sense. And they get to the landing page and they're just confused, and then they end up not doing anything. So obviously don't want that. So still speaking on the ad part, a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago at this point, we were at the 8-figure boardroom event where you gave a talk. And, and that was with like, I think Nick Fisher was there, Eddie Malouf, there's one other guy, I forgot his name, Cole was on there too. And I think a big theme was, there's a lot of people asking questions about, what should I do about this? And I'd say like 5 out of the 10 ways that it was answered was like, you need more creative, like make more creative. Like everyone really doubled down on that. So, speak on, because I know you at the previous even boardroom event, you talked about how we kind of like take 1 or 2 ads and turn it into like 50 different ads in a pretty simple way. So can you maybe break down that framework a little bit?
Yes. So first of all, from a very high level, there are essentially 2 key concepts you have to understand. The first is you have to understand what an ad angle is. So an ad angle is like, we're sitting here, we're like, we're helping people recruit salespeople. And so I'm like, man, we're going to write an ad that's direct offer ad. And I'm going to say, hey, we're going to give you a salesperson or you don't pay. Right? Like that's the angle of the ad, right? And you're like, cool. And that's an ad angle. And then another ad angle might be like, that ad worked well, but we've run a ton of that one angle that I just mentioned. Now let's like spin it around and say, instead of, hey, I'm going to give you this or you don't pay, let's say, hey, here's 5 reasons why people use our recruiting services, right? Do you see how that's a different angle? They're similar, but they're different, right? So that's the first thing you have to understand is there's different angles. But then on top of each angle, there are hundreds or potentially thousands of variations that you can make. I mean, really, it's actually kind of infinite technically, of potential variations or permutations that you can make off of the original angle. And this is the most critical part where people screw this up. When you have an ad that's working, you cannot just sit around and be like, let's put it this way. You can't pull what I did after I made my first webinar sell and be like, I'm Jeff Bezos and I don't need to do anything ever again, right? You have to.
I think too, like times have changed, right? I think even if we look back 4 or 5 years ago, I think you could. Like, people got away with running the exact same ad into the ground, and hundreds of thousands to spend, but obviously competition and times have changed. So yeah.
Yeah, I think to your point, that's probably correct too. And so long story short, when you have an ad angle that's working, how do you create variations of that? And what is a variation? Again, it's tweaking the original ad, whether it be a copywriting tweak, so you're changing the hook a little bit, but still it's the same angle, right? You're just having a new presenter, UGC and AI, or the same presenter in a different location. I mean, even editing variations where you're taking like an AI voice, a TikTok voice, and having that do the hook. We've seen that work really, really well, right? So you just basically have to be creative and say, okay, we know that this script works. We know that this kind of general angle works. How can we just present it in a slightly different way? And what you'll find out that's amazing is that those little tweaks can have massive changes on the performance of the ad. So at bare minimum, you're extending the life, the length essentially that this ad can live and serve your customers and serve you by bringing you customers and revenue and all this. And at the bare minimum, you're extending that window by adding variations. But the best case scenario is you're actually improving the performance because, hey, when I do an ad and then I have a female do the ad, the same ad, and it might perform twice as good, right? So it was already good. Now it's twice as good, right? And that's how you create variations. And where people get stuck, this is, I think, the most important part of this. Because we tell them all the time, hey, you need more curve, you need more curve. You just mentioned at the boardroom, right? We talked about that a lot. And people think, man, how the heck am I going to sit here and write like 10 angles of ads a week? Like that there are very few people that are that creative. And the key there is, number one, you don't even want to do it. Because if you did that, what's going to happen is all of your new tests for your media buying are going to be new unproven angles. And we know like the hit rate of those is like 20%, 30%. So 70% of your testing budget is going to fail, which means your costs overall for the entire account are going to go way up. Number two is that's not what's required. All you need to do is, you need to continue to test new angles a little bit, 1, 2, 3, and that depends on how much you're spending and all that, but a little bit of your budget. But a lot of your testing budget is variations on already previous winning angles, and those have a much higher success rate.
Yeah, a couple things to add to that too, just to give more like actionable stuff, like stuff that we even do is, Spencer mentioned it. It's like if you take the original ad and then you literally just go to like Fiverr or find different people to record it. You can get different people, and then what we like to do is we use headlines, or banners, I guess. Do we call it headlines or banners? I always forget. Yeah, the banners on the ads. So we would have, it's basically text above the ad, and then you changing that text 5 times, and then that turns one ad into 5 ads. And let's say you have 2 UGC people, that's one ad that you just turn into 10 ads. Right. So that as you can see, like it really compounds on itself when you change like one little variable. And obviously we've seen it work really, really well. So obviously we talked a lot about ads, funnels, and all that kind of stuff. And someone that's watching this might be thinking like, number one, don't have the time to do this stuff, but also don't have like the want to learn copywriting, learn all these things. So then obviously the next step is people like, okay, I can just like find a media buyer, but a lot of times it's not that simple. So maybe just some tips or recommendations of how you would find someone like, basically, how would you find someone like you? Which is hard.
Yeah, well, so I think to zoom out and say, look, like, what are the responsibilities that you need when you say someone like me, right? Like, you've got copywriting, you've got media buying, then you've got like overall marketing strategy. Most companies don't like, especially if you're smaller, you're doing multiple 7 figures a year, sub 7 figures, like whatever it is, you're in that range. You don't need a marketing strategist. Like, you don't even have the budget to really pay for it. Let's be honest, right? But what could be helpful is, having someone help you with copy and potentially having someone help you with media buying. But the reality is to find someone who can do both of those skills at a high level. And if you're looking for that at that scale, you're probably thinking, man, they could probably do this better than me, right? If that's the case, then you are looking for someone probably like me. And you have to think like, well, like, what does it take to hire someone with a better copywriting skill set than me and a better media buying skill set for me than me in an industry where those are 2 of the most in-demand skills out there. And because they're two of the most required skills to scale your business, why doesn't this person just run their own business, right? And so I think to change the frame there, it's like, okay, well, let's just divide those two things up. Can you hire a contractor to help you with some ads? Of course, like that's, it's hard to find a great copywriter, but when you're first getting started, even just finding a good copywriter can help you a tremendous amount. They can write an ad for you a week. It's not going to cost that much money. And the best part is if they're better than you are, you can write 2 or 3 ads and have them review your copy, and it'll help you improve, right? And then in terms of a media buyer, how you want to think through that is like, there's 2 core skill sets that a great media buyer has. The first is the actual, media buying, the clicking of the buttons in the ads manager. That's surprisingly not that hard to do, right? Like anyone can really learn that. And, worst case scenario, you could find someone, this is actually what Cole did, who's really good at like tech related things like setting up CRMs, HubSpot, Zapier integration, stuff like that, and teach them media buying, because it's not that difficult, right? What is harder to find is a person who understands media buying at such a deep level that they can actually present test ideas from a media buying standpoint that are very valuable. And that person's probably going to cost 10 to 12 grand a month, maybe 15 grand a month. They're probably going to have a tremendous amount of experience. And they're probably going to have either ran their own agency before and be very good at the media buying stuff, but just not know how to run a business and not understand all the other parts and skills. And they're going to come under you as someone that can help teach them that. Or they're going to have a tremendous amount of experience working at other, fast growing info businesses that they help scale. And again, those 2 things are hard to find, right? So tactically, what I would do if I were you, if you're looking for these people, is number 1, I would start with looking for an agency. Now, I know that's a bit backwards from what you're saying, but I think most people, especially as you're early on, sub 7 figures, low to mid 7 figures, working with an agency, especially if marketing's not your forte, is the best way to go. And specifically doing the whole Hormozi frame where it's like, hey, I'm going to hire you for 6 months, but I want you to teach me what you're doing, basically. And I'll pay you a little bit extra. And then once you understand that, even with I did the same thing, by the way. I hired an agency. I had a very, very good agency that I hired, that I told them up front, I said, look, I'm hiring you to do the media buying, but I'm also hiring you to help me hire a media buyer to replace you. And he did that. Like he actually helped me find someone, did interviews, taught me what to look for, all those things. So I think that's probably the easiest thing to do if you don't have experience. If you do have some more experience, then it's just classic recruiting. You do a lot of interviews, you meet a lot of people, 85% of them suck and you never hire them. And 15%, 14% of them are good. And you're like, man, maybe I should hire this guy. And then you'll find the one person that's like, this guy's a stud, I got to hire, that's the boring answer, but it's the most accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, more often than not, it's the boring answer that people need to hear and implement on, not the flashy, shiny object thing of, most people are like, oh, he's probably going to tell me to go find an AI software that can run all my ads for me. And it's like, maybe don't do that. So yeah, I mean, one of the things that I like to end these podcasts with is just trying to figure out, okay, from your perspective, what are some of like the biggest mistakes or, things that you see people make from a marketing perspective, like mistakes that they make, or maybe like misconceptions or things that people usually do wrong?
Yeah, I think the most common, like there's a handful that are very common. One of them being the classic shiny object syndrome. So at the scale that we're at with closers, right, we test a lot of different traffic channels. We test a lot of different funnels. We do a lot of stuff. But the reality is we have an entire department of people that is dedicated to doing marketing for one company. Okay. Most companies, if you're watching this, you're probably like, man, I don't have a department of people. I have like a video editor and I have me, or I have like a media buyer and I have me. And that's fine. But if that's the case, then you're probably best suited focusing on just making the thing you're already doing better than on trying a bunch of new stuff. Like, for example, something we have in our queue to try is Twitter ads. And then after that, Reddit ads. And, it's like, should most people, if they're like just getting to their first 100K month with Facebook, be like, no, the secret is it's Reddit ads. It's like, no, it's not, dude. The secret is just scaling.
Rumble ads.
Yeah. The secret is whatever I'm not doing. It's this other thing. It's like, no, dude. The secret's just to like have persistence and get better at what you're doing, right? So that's probably the biggest, most common one. But other common ones are like, you brought up earlier, not having enough ads. Like I'm scaling my ad spend, all my ad costs are going up. That's bad. A really big one is thinking that you get paid in percentages and not dollars. And so what I mean by that is there's so many people I'll get on coaching calls with, and they're spending 30 grand, a month on ads, or not a tremendous amount of money, and they're making 150 grand. And I get on a call with them, and their question is, I can't scale my ads until I improve my close rate. And I go, really? Tell me about that. And they say, yeah, my close rate's only 21%, but so-and-so told me I have to get to 25 to scale my ads. Okay? And I always tell them, like, look, what do you spend on ads? And they'll say, well, what do you mean, dollars? I say, exactly. I say, and then what do you get out from this whole thing? They say dollars. I say, okay, so well, then why are you worried about this percentage? You don't get paid. You don't pay for ads with percentages. You pay for ads with dollars, and you get dollars out. The percentage doesn't really matter unless you can't make that profitable, which you already are. So a lot of people, by the way, I made this mistake a ton too. So I'm not talking down to anybody. I made the same mistake. But I would say those are probably the three most common. The only other one I would say that's important, it's less of a mistake, but just something to be aware of if you are starting out, you're earlier on. When you're spending money on ads, especially high ticket, you're going to have some goofy ROAS numbers early on. And that's awesome. You should flex that. That's pretty cool. But if you're spending $10,000 a month and your ROAS is 8x, I'm not that impressed. That's not really that impressive. I'm just going to be honest. It's great, and you should be very happy because that's a huge accomplishment. But the reality is, again, even ROAS doesn't really tell you much. It's like, if I told you we're at an 8x ROAS, like our ROAS lifetime since I've been here is like 3.5x. And everyone's like, oh man, I guess if you're doing 8x, you're better at marketing than me, right? It's like, well, yeah, but like at one point we're spending like $40,000 a day, so like, yeah. I don't know if it's really the same thing, right? But I only say this, not to make fun of those people. Again, that's a huge accomplishment, especially for your first business to get to that point. But you have to realize, because I made this mistake a ton, is, I'm spending 10, 20 grand a month. I'm like, oh, I'm making all this money, 8x ROAS. And then I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to 50K a month and I'm still going to be at 8x ROAS.
8x, yeah.
And that never happens. And then what happens is, if you were spending 50, you would be at like a 3.5, 4x, which is still amazing. Like that's still great. But because you're not at 8x, now you think that you're doing something wrong. And then you're like, and then you get to 35K a month instead of 50, and you say, oh man, I've already dropped to 6x. I can't keep scaling. It's like, dude, you're fine. Like you could probably go to 100, like you're totally fine. But people, they psych themselves out by setting that false expectation.
Yeah. I mean, you just ended it with the word of just expectation, of setting the expectations in the right way of like, like you said, if you're scaling the spend, it's probably not going to sustain the same ROAS. And then also, I think there's something to say about, there's so many different people in the industry and everyone's creating content. And, someone might say, I'm doing, there's someone in the Slack channel the other day that were like, yeah, we got like a 42x ROAS. And it's like, well, the context is 70% of that is organic, and it's a good organic following, and they spent 5K, so it's like, it's not, you can't just take 42x ROAS at, at face value without understanding the context. So, dude, last question. And, actually the way I'm going to want to do this is I want you to think about, I'm going to do like an end, like CTA, but, I want you to think about like one thing that you want someone to take away from this interview, or just in general, like a piece of advice or something that you would give to someone listening to this episode. Think about that for like 30 seconds. I'll do this outro really quickly. So for those of you that are listening up to this point, of course, whether it's from a marketing perspective, sales perspective, or you need to find setters, closers, or really anyone for your company, it's kind of what we do. So if you want to go ahead and check out a really quick training from my partner, Cole Gordon, down in the description below, and also in the show notes in the podcast app, there's going to be a video that he put together, super short. I think it's like 5 to 6 minutes, that really just breaks down how we can help. And I mean, at the end of the day, like, you've made it probably 50 minutes into this episode. So you're probably at least a little bit interested on exactly how we can do that, and how we can help you scale your company as well. And the cool part is you'll talk to a lot to me and Spencer, not one-on-one, but in group calls and stuff that we host within the group, and we can help you on the marketing side, content, ads, all that kind of stuff. So down in the description below, click the link, check that out. And Spencer, what you got for the beautiful people?
Yes, my piece of advice, it is also a bit of a joke. And here we go. So there are two things that men always lie on. The first thing is their height, and the second thing is their ROAS. Okay. So I say that again as a joke, but the reason why I say that is to kind of go off what you were just saying there at the end, which is at the end of the day, like, do not look in a community or whatever social media and be like, oh my gosh, I only have a X 4X ROAS, and this guy's got a 78X ROAS. You don't know the context, you don't know the story. At the end of the day, you win in marketing by thinking through the journey as if you were a customer. That is how you win. You do not win by looking at other people's ROAS numbers. You don't even really win by copying other people's ads. I mean, that can help you in the short term, but the reality is then you never learn the skill, right? And so the best piece of advice I can give anybody is if you are like, man, we're scaling our funnel and I want to improve it. We're scaling our marketing, we're scaling even the sales process. We're scaling this front-end acquisition process. What you need to do is go through, secret shop your funnel. And if you don't want to do that, then call one of your friends, have them do it for you, have them record their screen going through everything. And you can do it for them if they own a similar business. And experience your funnel and your sales process as a customer and think through, man, like, is this confusing? Is this hard? Does this make sense right off the bat? Do I just get this, or do I have to like really think about it? And I promise if you do that, if you just focus on doing that over and over and over again, your ROAS, I can't promise it'll be 72, but it'll be much better than what it is now. Instead of going on social media and blogging about how you figured out the new secret ad trick and that your ROAS is 6x or something. I don't know. That's not relevant. Just focus on being a customer and thinking through as a customer would when they experience your entire process.
There we go. Well, Spencer, thanks again for hanging out with us. I'm sure we'll do a follow-up episode. And for those of you who are listening, I mean, if you have questions or anything that you feel like we could go a little bit deeper on, make sure to drop those down in the comments. And again, we'll, Spencer and I will be more than happy to jump on another episode and really dive into some of those things. Last time, go ahead and down in the description below, go ahead and check out that video from Cole. And it really just kind of breaks down how we could potentially help you. And that's about it, guys. So anything else you need, let us know down in the comments. Leave a like if you liked the video. Also subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you guys on the next episode. Talk soon. Peace.